Hello and welcome to this PM Forum event organised by the London Committee. My name is Sarah Longdon and I am Director of Business Development at Quadrant Chambers in London. Today we're looking at lockdown and beyond. We're really pleased to have Andy Rogerson of Grist and Laura Cutler of Herbert Smith Freehills as our panellists. They're going to take us through the findings of Grist's latest Sprint survey, which took feedback from 75 marketing and communications specialists at the UK's leading professional services firms to reveal how they're coping, what they are doing now, and how they are planning for the future. Andy, I'm sure, will be very well known to many of you. He is MD of Grist, an award-winning thought leadership agency focused on professional services. Andy is a regular commentator on the B2B content marketing industry and has spoken at a number of events and conferences. Prior to founding Grist, Andy was marketing director at the Economist Intelligence Unit in London and New York. Laura is head of marketing for the UK US EMEA at Herbert Smith Freehills. She has over 15 years of experience working in professional services with particular expertise in marketing strategy and omni-channel campaign management. Laura's passion lays in creating and driving forward thought leadership campaigns which seek to resolve client issues and generate new perspective surrounding some of the world's biggest challenges. On top of this, and for any Strictly Come Dancing fans out there, in her spare time, Laura also teaches Latin American and ballroom dancing. Now, over to Andy to kick us off.
Just in terms of this survey and why we actually created it, it strikes us when COVID-19 first kicked off and everything started to erupt. Most of the things that we face as marketing and comms professionals, we have something that we can look back to, whether that be the financial crisis, whatever it is. We can look back to that and think, well, actually, what did we do then to get us through this crisis? In reality, we've not faced anything like this ever before. And our clients were desperate for some help in terms of what their peer group were actually doing, but both now to get them through this crisis and how they're planning for the future. And that was the idea behind this survey, really to give us a bit of advice, a bit of help in terms of that respect. In terms of format, I'll run you through the 8 slides, and then Laura is very kindly going to comment on these slides to give you the voice from the trenches, as it were. And then we've got a couple of polls that we'll run with you as well. Just in terms of that survey, as Sarah very kindly introduced the survey, please bear in mind this was run start to finish in 4 weeks, so you forgive any minor typos or any of that. This really is a sprint survey. There were 75 marketing directors, comms directors and BD directors, some of whom are actually on this call, so thank you very much for filling that out in such prompt time as well. And it's also worth bearing in mind that this survey closed on April the 29th. And that's important just in terms of some of the responses, because the dates that we run from May. So just getting into the survey, then the survey itself is in 2 parts. There's lockdown and beyond. And the first set of questions were around lockdown. And the first question that we asked was trying to get firms to rank their current marketing priorities. Now, in terms of those priorities, I don't think anybody would argue that our main priority right now, marketing or otherwise, is the health and well-being of our families, our networks, our colleagues, and to a degree, our clients as well. And I think that's absolutely first and foremost. But beyond that, we wanted to get an idea of what the other marketing priorities were like right now. Now, we talked to Grist itself, the thought leadership agency. We work with prof services firms, we work with financial services firms, and we work with tech firms. Looking at the latter 2 of those, it's really interesting when we speak to some of these firms, the view that they have of professional services. They genuinely view that we're kind of almost immune to this crisis, which is frustrating. And you ask them why, and they talk about the services that we have and that we create to help clients get through the crisis. And they say, well, we point to that, don't you? You help firms restructure as much as the M&A work, so irrespective of how good the environment is, you're always in it. Now, obviously, that's not true, and we're very far from immune to this crisis. You know, we're reading a lot in the FT about the big 4 and some of the salary cuts of 25%. global source for research, is talking about the consulting market in the next 12 months contracting by at least 23%. Clearly, we're not immune, but we do have some services to help. And it's probably no surprise, the first of the balls that this marketing community are juggling is that developing services to help clients cope with the crisis, that bottom left-hand corner, that 59%. So probably no surprise there. But beyond that, the figures start to split and we start to see two distinct groups forming. 55% ensuring clients get as much attention as you can give them. That is a relatively short-term look by companies who believe, by firms who believe that the best way to get themselves through this crisis is pay almost religious attention to their current clients, and quite a short-term view. But there's another pool of 45%, so again, almost 1 in 2, who are taking a slightly longer-term view and are already starting to plan for next year. So a slightly longer-term view than that first 55%. And we see this throughout the research, that there seems to be two quite distinct audiences in this. Half of whom are taking a relatively short-term view, and the other half who are taking a slightly longer-term view. In terms of some of these other priorities, trying to win new business, still going for growth, differentiation, to a degree that's taken a bit of a backseat amongst those that we polled. And then finally, refocusing on your brand. This is almost kind of a personal disappointment, to be honest, that only 28% of our audience, or only 1 in 4, just over 1 in 4, are actually taking this opportunity to think, what does the firm really stand for? And how can we push those buttons right now? So how can we refocus on the brand? And that, as I say, was a slightly disappointing result for us. But the main finding here is this two different pools, half of whom are looking at this next 3 months and focusing on the clients, that the other half are thinking, actually, let's take a slightly longer term view. Look, Laura, where are you in that? What's your view on that?
Well, I think the two top results really resonate for us. In terms of developing services, it's not necessarily creating new products, but making sure that we've got the issue and reflecting that around the traditional services that we would provide. And obviously there'll be teams that are going to be busier than others, but we are sort of trying to map that against the client trajectory as they come through the initial reactions from the crisis, that short to medium term and then long term. But for us, we've got these guiding principles around empathy and insight. So we've been equipping our fee earners with conversation toolkits, encouraging them to make those personal connections with their clients, which, as a people services industry, we should be doing a lot more of. And I think that actually this has created a really nice catalyst to show how that works. And that hopefully this will continue beyond the short term. But we've definitely been encouraging a lot of our teams to do that and just have those personal conversations, not necessarily trying to sell something, just checking in with our clients, seeing what issues they're grappling with, and then how we can help them.
Very good. Thank you very much. The second question that we looked at in our sprint survey was asking clients if we understand the objectives, but the second question was talking about challenges and where they see the main challenge. Now, as an organisation, we've been writing quite a lot about how we believe that cutting budgets in a time of crisis is a false economy. And I think we've quoted in the report that we'll happily send you at the end of this webinar. We've quoted some quite influential sources. So if you have a look at things like Harvard Business Review, there's a classic article about how to market in a downturn. If you have a look at people like Mark Ritson, who's writing in marketing, we've got another guy slightly Marmite, and you can either love him or hate him, but he writes some really interesting stuff and how he believes that in times of crisis, it's in effect a time to double down your marketing spend in areas that you really feel like you can get an advantage, because that's going to get you a greater share of voice as your competitors drop out of that marketing field. And again, we've written a lot about that ourselves, but it would seem that the main challenge that certainly the 75 people who filled in our survey are facing is this budget freeze. So it's exactly what has happened, is the thing that we're all writing about hazard. So budget freeze is the biggest challenge for 59%. Home working is the second challenge that they said, and this kind of intrigued us as well, because my personal view of home working is that we've done pretty well, not just within professional services, but I think UK PLC has done pretty well at home working. I think we've adapted really well. I think there's some fatigue in the last week or so, but on the whole, I think we've adapted pretty well to the home working environment. But it is perceived as a challenge for 53%. Then comes the furloughed staff and the lack of in-house resource. So the pure resource question of this, if you like, ranking is a high current challenge. And again, as marketing professionals within professional services firms, I think we were long and hard at being able to do stuff with a lack of resource. So again, I think we've done pretty well on that score. And then something that really interests us, and again, another kind of, if you like, common theme behind this research is this: 36% say that a lack of a current plan is one of their biggest challenges right now. Now, if you remember, this survey was run on 75 responses. When we looked at the interims from this survey, i.e. 50 responses, the first 50 responses, which was, bear in mind, this closed pretty much the last day of April. So when we looked at the interims, that would have been 3 or 4 days before that. This lack of a current plan was actually a higher problem, was perceived as being a bigger problem than either furloughed staff or lack of in-house resource. And that kind of points to two things. One, the magnitude of that problem. So clearly, if 36% of us are facing that right now, it's a huge problem. But secondly, it also points to where marketers are focusing their time right now, because the shift between the 50% when we did the interims and the 50% and the 36%, clearly marketing execs are looking at that right now. So that's the thing that they're focused on. A couple of final things to mention on this side is around lack of partner time, which is seen as a major problem by a third of us. Although I would caveat that with some people I've been talking to, said actually, I've never had as much client time as I do now. It's the only time they've ever picked up the phone in the last 3 years. So I would say that's a bit of a black and white thing. 2/3 of us clearly are not getting enough partner time. I think a third of us are actually getting brilliant partner time. And a lack of differentiation, which I know is a little bit of a bugbear of Laura's as well. Laura, does those results chime with what you're seeing at HSF?
Yeah, I think, we're experiencing an element of all of those challenges. I think we've done particularly well on the home working dynamics. A lot of us, particularly across the business services functions, have said that actually we feel more connected now than we were in the office. We're introducing lots of virtual coffee breaks. We're having more FaceTime on video with our partners and other stakeholders to get things done. And I think there's this real sense of not trying to use email so much, and that's being reflected in our external communication strategy as well. And I think that's also transitioning into this internal piece that we find ourselves grappling with as well, because it's, we all know it's just too much and our inboxes are exploding. So, not only being conscious of that for our clients, but also for ourselves. And, with Mental Health Awareness Week happening in the UK next week, I think we've all been very alive to that and just very conscious of, different people's working situations, whether they're, caring, they're trying to homeschool, or, whether they're actually living alone. So I think, using the technology that's available to us has been a really positive thing, and one that I hope will transfer over into the future when we come out of the pandemic. In terms of a lack of a current plan, I think we're quite fortunate in that we have a very active crisis prevention and management team, and so they're so used to mobilising bespoke teams, within 24 hours, We've got stripped down steering committees to make decisions really quickly. You know, I'm sure for a lot of people that have joined today that, you know, working for a partnership, it can be quite difficult to make those decisions quickly because everyone has a view. But I would say that, you know, we've taken quite a fast and practical approach to that, and just made sure that we've nuanced, you know, various materials so that everyone, you know, can have a sense of resonance within, you know, what we're trying to achieve going forward. And I think because also, you know, our services as a whole are not necessarily changing. Yes, there'll be emphasis that peaks in various different practice areas or jurisdictions and sectors. There is something for everyone, and there is this sense of global solidarity as well, I would say, across the firm. So, you know, our Asia colleagues, you know, we're learning lessons from them and how they've dealt with it, you know, and then transitioning that over to the European teams as well. You know, obviously we need to tailor for the different audiences, but it's really nice to start sharing those insights, and actually the technology has really helped with that as well, so that we're getting more face time and more insight from our international colleagues as well. So I think, you know, overall, yes, there are lots of challenges, but there's some silver linings in there as well.
And to be honest, it's one of the reasons why I really wanted you to do this, outside of the fact that you're a really great speaker, obviously, is the fact that you're doing that. And it struck me, I've talked to a lot of people over the last 2 weeks, and it's great to hear the positive stories coming out of this. And to be honest, I wish the press would cover the positive stories a little bit more often, because I just think that would be a benefit to all of us. But that's terrific. Thank you. The third set of questions we asked were around what marketing comms are currently being provided to client organisations. Now, I don't know how many people around this webinar have looked at an organisation called Good to Be Social, but they're interesting. They're over in the States, but they produced a publication which was effectively the top US law firms' response to COVID. And I know that there are a lot of law firms on this call, but what was interesting in that was, I think there might have been 20 sites that they covered and what these responses were like. And obviously everybody has a response centre, a microsite, or whatever, to a degree. I think they've taken over from the Brexit response centre or Brexit microsite, and we're giving that a dust off. And I'm sure there was a lot to be had for those companies, those firms who got there first. So first mover advantage. I'm sure there was a lot to be gained by having these response centres. But when I looked at those, the top 20, and this is what they thought were the best 20 as well, and you scratch the surface, I did not genuinely see anything that was truly different in those microsites or websites. And what was in there, again, if we have a look at this survey, 67%, what was in there, this news of COVID-19 developments. That's your blogs, your articles, in effect, your market updates, the ones that we've been producing ad infinitum, I guess, since the start, since we were allowed to start marketing professional services firms. So 67% covering news of COVID-19 developments, and almost the same, another 60% covering the services that we provide to help clients cope. Again, both of those make absolute sense, but are they going to differentiate the firm? It seemed that everybody was pretty much saying the same thing in the same way. And certainly 2/3 of this, our audience were. Less, so slightly less, 55%, we're starting to look at what to do when the crisis is over. And we're reading a lot now about, do we lean into COVID-19 and write about COVID-19, or do we lean away from it and start writing about the services and market updates that we would have been producing without COVID? And we're starting to hear a lot now that people are actually starting to stop COVID-19, pure communication, it's just about COVID-19, and start to take a look over the parapet and start to think about other comms. And clearly 55% of this audience were doing just that. 45% were just communicating as normal, and it struck us communicating as normal probably is market updates and service updates, the 67% and 60%. So, but potentially that's folded into that pool. And only 39%, or only 4 in 10 of us, are starting to provide some kind of practical guides, so what to do when this thing ends, the how-to guides. And it struck us potentially, if we are genuinely looking for differentiation, that possibly might have been where we actually started with the thought leadership. Again, Laura, does that chime with you? Obviously, you were one of the first movers, weren't you, at HSF? You did get in there quickly.
Yes, we did, and I would say that the default was to churn out as much content as we possibly could. Start issuing lots of e-bulletins, and within the first week it was quite horrifying actually how much content was going out there that was a little bit uncoordinated. So from a brand and marketing perspective, we've been able to put in some quite strict governance and guidelines, and had the support of the leadership to do that. I would say that we needed the data to be able to back that up and give us a bit more authority on streamlining that. And I have talked about our guiding principles of empathy and insight, and part of being empathetic is realizing that clients don't want all of that information hitting their inboxes. So it's all around us in social media and the press, and we're talking about it amongst our friends and family circles as well. So I think making sure that we're collating our insights, and we've introduced weekly bulletins, which is not groundbreaking, but it's helped to direct some of that enthusiasm internally, to help them charter some of their thoughts and insights, and making sure that we're just not regurgitating what's out there at the moment. And that point of differentiation is bringing in our sector expertise or our local market expertise by answering the question of, well, so what? We're being quite strict on what gets through, and also how we're using our social media channels as well. So we've condensed the feed so that it's more global posts, and then encouraged a lot of our people to use their own personal accounts, which again is another silver lining, because we've been saying that people by people, you need to promote your own reputation and brand in the market, and for you to talk knowledgeably about this and put a human touch to it, it's going to get that real sense of connection with your audiences, rather than it just being a standard post on our main account feed. So I think there's lots more we can do, and I would love to go a bit stricter on the governance side, but I think we're in a pretty good place now, but also we're having to juggle the COVID-19 fatigue amongst clients, and also internally. There's lots of BAU projects that are still undergoing, and there's different sectors and different jurisdictions that are at different phases, and so they're wanting to see some commentary on other topics as well, just to either give them some light relief, or just to help them navigate the things that are still very much on their to-do lists.
It's interesting, isn't it? Times of crisis, I think, really does shine a light on some of the issues that we've been grappling with for some time, the governance, the use of social, the how we market particular sectors. So it's great to hear people responding to that in a positive way. The next couple of questions we asked, which is something very close to a lot of marketers' hearts, it is around frozen marketing budget and cut marketing budget. The two brought a very similar response. So for the sake of time, if I focus on what proportion of the overall marketing budget has been cut, I think that would be a good place to start. Now, there's a couple of really interesting things have come out of this slide, this piece of research. That the first one of those is that figure on the left-hand side, the 19%. So what that is saying is there's nearly 1 in 5 of the people who filled in our survey had no marketing budget cut whatsoever. So it wasn't reduced at all. Now, it's really dangerous. These are small numbers. They're only 75 because we wanted to get it out into the market and get it back quickly. So there's only 19% of those 75. You know, that is a limited number. But we wanted to take a look at that and think, of those 90%, is that a particular type of company? Is it the corporate recovery guys? Is the guys focused on private clients or employment, for instance, services that we know are still doing pretty well? Was it the management consultancies that you're looking at these big digital transformation projects, and is that showing? But there wasn't a single stream that shone through at that. There wasn't a particular sector or a particular type of company. It seemed way more to be a philosophical thing that these firms were just not interested in cutting their budget, and they firmly believed and potentially learnt from the last financial crisis that the way to do this is the Mark Ritson approach and keep on investing. And it was clear to us, lots of this survey is around planning, and it was clear to us that these firms who are not cutting at all are clearly going to have a little bit of advantage on those that are cutting. Of those that are cutting, which is the 1 to 10 to 91 to 100, you'll see the different proportions that are being cut there. The average that has been cut is around 35%, if you look at those figures. And we were talking earlier on with Nadia and Sarah from the PM Forum. There's always some kind of magic number drops out of these surveys. And this magic number that really seems to resonate, that this 35%. And interestingly, when we've been talking to some of our other clients, when you look at the stuff that's actually fallen out of your budget, travel, entertainment, the physical events, some of the sponsorship, but potentially that's not as tough and ask to cut the budget back by 30%, 35%, as it might be in other times. And indeed, some of those clients said, actually, I could have cut it a bit more, to be honest, if you have a look at all of those things that have actually just naturally fallen out, and I've got a bit of extra to invest in content, in digital, whatever that might be. So it is quite interesting.
I think we're having a bit of a difficulty with Andy there at the moment. Laura, can I bring you in to see what it is? Was there anything particular you wanted to say on that one? I mean, I personally have found, and it may be because barristers are funded in slightly different ways, that we certainly haven't looked at cutting at the moment.
As Andy said, that because we've reduced business travel, large-scale conferences and events have obviously had to pivot onto a virtual platform or be postponed to later in the year or into 2021. That a lot of the savings have been quite easy to manage. But I suppose from a thought leadership point of view, it's very important to make sure that those budgets and those investments are there, because we are building reputation and brand for the longer term. And there are a lot of lessons from how brands responded to the financial crisis. And I think for us at Herbert Smith Freehills, it was very much making sure that we were still visible in the market, making sure that we still had those personal connections with our clients, that we were still very much active and there for them. And a lot of the C-suite members at our clients will be having that trajectory and looking towards the future. So I think we just need to be sensitive to that, provide them with quick, short and sharp, concise insights in the short to medium term. But those big sort of blue sky thinking pieces will absolutely resonate, and we need to pivot to that. Particularly around future of work, future of cities. What will happen to the offices? Will we continue to work from home? What's going to happen to the real estate there, and all of that digitalization that's coming through. And of course, you need budget in there to get that credibility, get the voice from the market, and reflect that in your communications going back out to industry. So not surprised actually by the polling results. I think that's that's definitely reflective of where we're at across the professional services industry.
The second stream of questions were around, so if the first stream was around lockdown, that the second stream we're thinking about beyond that. And the question that we wanted to ask was, how long do you expect your current budget freeze or cut to last? Now, first of all, the good news. So bear in mind, this research was finished at the end of April. First of all, the good news was that nobody that we polled thought that the budget freeze was going to last longer than 6 months. So if you think, last results taken end of April, so from May, nobody thought it was going to last longer than 6 months, so nobody thought it was going to last beyond November. That's the good news. But now the bad news. Nobody thought it was going to last up to 1 month, so nobody thought that budget freeze was going to be ending before June. And nobody thought, or only 3% thought it was going to be between 1 and 2 months. So the vast majority of the people that we surveyed were again split 50-50, again, these two polls. That the first half, 42% between 2 and 3 months, and the second side, so the other half, 55%, thought between 3 and 6 months. Now, there's a couple of things coming back out of this. If you think about those two polls, it strikes us that this 42% plus 3%, 45%, are potentially going to be able to get something out before the summer, because this is falling, if you like, right on the summer months. The two halves right over July and August. But you've got one half that seems to be able to produce something before the summer. You've got the other half that is clearly looking beyond the summer, and that's probably not going to be in August, is it? It's probably going to be September. So again, we have this split. And what struck us really about this split was whether you are looking to get your marketing out or your big thought leadership campaigns before the 2 to 3 months, or whether you're looking so in July, or whether that's going to be around September, there is going to be an almighty fight for share of voice at that point. And we're going to have to do an awful lot to differentiate our comms at that point. And Laura, I think when we spoke earlier, you made a very similar point about how difficult it's going to be to get that share of voice at these times.
Yeah, that's right. And I think, you know, for those companies that have had to cut budgets, or, you know, they're struggling with lack of in-house resource for furlough arrangements, or, you know, what have you, I think the art of creativity is really going to shine through. And as for us as brand and marketing professionals, you know, that's quite exciting. And I think digital will have a big role to play within that. I think to straddle those two time periods, we've been conscious of drip feeding out not only COVID-19 related content, but also some BAU. So just making sure that it's very targeted. You know, we're listening to the market, we're responding, and we're responding appropriately. You know, and we had a lot of thought leadership campaigns that were already in the pipeline. So yes, we've had to pause, refocus, pivot, but by no means have we stopped anything. I think it's just about reframing, and then thinking about how we can drip feed some more sort of bite-sized comments and insights in the lead up to maybe you know, a larger scale report and campaign that will come through. But you know, we talked about earlier, it's about bringing those marketing fundamentals to life. You know, we all know that we have to know our audience, target appropriately, segment, and sometimes we can lose our way when we're trying to keep all of our stakeholders happy. So you know, I think that's hopefully something that we'll take forward as we come through this pandemic, and hopefully not revert to type come 2021.
I'm sure you won't revert to type at all. And again, reassuring to it seems like Laura and HSF are indeed quite on the planning process. That seems quite obvious from some of the things that she's been saying. But the second question in this tranche that we asked of our audience is, does everybody else feel that way? It is what are other people doing to plan for post-COVID-19 comms? We run quite major thought leadership programs on behalf of quite a lot of law firms, some of whom are on this call, as well as other prof services, financial services and tech. And quite a lot of those have actually been paused, although significantly, several were actually started up again last week. So potentially this is reflected of that. And thinking about the planning side of things, what are you doing now to plan for post-COVID-19 comms, what I was talking about earlier on? In reality, you can look at this and you can take a real positive from this. So with the glass half full, we can look at making top-level strategic plans with the board, 39%, making tactical plans with the team, the 27%, so 66%, 2/3 of us are actively involved in planning for post-COVID-19 comms right now. So we could pat ourselves on the back and think that is terrific, particularly with that 39% who are making top-level strategic plans with the board. We can say that's great. We have the ear of the board, and they're engaging with us. That's a real tick in the box. However, with the glass half empty, we can look at that and think, we are now 7 weeks into lockdown going on here. And if we're only just making these top-level strategic plans with the board now, for 4 in 10 of us, is that a sign that we haven't been given the strategic direction by the board until now? Is that a sign we've really been kind of worried about, well, which way are we going here? Are we leaning in, or are we leaning out, etc.? So we can take it as positive, or we can take it as negative. Let's take it as a positive and focus on that. But as I said, potentially that is us waiting for the board. 27%, so just over 1 in 4 of us are making tactical plans with the team. So we've got our strategic direction and we're looking at what that actually means. 20%, so 1 in 5, are being even more tactical, helping partners spend any downtime on BD activities. So that'll be the personal BD plans that we sit and go through with the partners. And again, I think that's great activity, but potentially that might deflect some of our obviously quite limited resource, potentially from some of the bigger stuff that we might be doing. And then a kind of a frightening 15% are actually doing nothing right now to focus on post-COVID-19 comms, completely focused on just the short term and the idea that we need to get through this, but before we can start thinking about what's coming next. Again, look, Laura, does that chime with you?
It does, yeah. I would say that on a positive note, we've definitely had more traction with the board. They've been very invested in taglines and imagery, which is all very subjective and people can get caught up on. But I think overall, the guiding principles, the ethos of our brand and what we want to portray has been something that they've been particularly engaged with and has sought our advice on. So we've done lots of competitor research, we've gathered lots of insight from client conversations and started to pull that together. So I would say that although it can be quite time consuming to do all of those conversations and do the analysis with the data to back it up, particularly for us, it's definitely working to just reinstill all of those marketing beliefs that we've all had throughout our careers, and that we definitely have an active listening audience within our top tier of the leaders across the business, which is just really great to see. And you're always going to get those in enthusiastic few that want to perhaps go off on a slight different tangent, want to stretch the brand, or have those really strong opinions that come out that you might just need to pull back and rein in a little bit. But I would say that overall, it's great that they're having an opinion. For a lot of lawyers, they're quite risk averse. And so a lot of the commentary is, well, on the one hand, you could have this, and on the one hand, you could have that. And I'm constantly trying to push them on, well, what do you believe will happen? And so, there are instances where it's gone a little bit too far, and we just need to pull that back bring that in line with our guiding principles and the ethos of the brand. But overall, I think people have found their voices, which is great, really great for us.
Reassuring to hear. So particularly law firms and lawyers making predictions. That is terrific. You're a tough nut, clearly. Yeah, absolutely terrific. Two more questions, and I am quite conscious of time. The first of those was, how long will it take you once to get the green light to have the appropriate thought leadership ready to respond? And this gets into some of that polling question that we've gone through. This gets into some of what Laura has been talking of about dusting that thought leadership down. But again, if you think about this, we've got a 38% ready to go. And again, that seems relatively positive. And we think that is exactly what Laura's been talking about. They're dusting off these campaigns, potentially doing a couple of additional interviews on campaigns that have been paused, potentially at field work or wherever that might be. And we've added to those to make those, if you like, COVID-19 ready. So a full 38% are ready to go, really positive. Again, tipping that glass upside down and looking at it half empty, that says that a full 62% are not going to be ready to go when we've got the green light. And bear in mind, this green light is around their budget and when that would be released, not about lockdown in general. Of those 62% who are not going to be ready, that the vast majority, luckily, are going to take up between 1 month and 3 months. There. So that's about 49%, 13, 15 and 21. It's going to take them up to 3 months to get ready. And an unfortunate 13% are going to take another 3 to 6 months. If you marry those figures with some of the figures that we talked about earlier on about how long people expect their budget freeze to last, the vast majority who had a budget freeze expect it to last between 3 and 6 months. If we add these figures onto those figures, you can see that there is going to be a minority of firms, but it is a significant minority, who are not going to have any thought leadership ready for the next 6 to 12 months. So in one sense, there is going to be an almighty bun fight for share of voice when these things happen, when we're released around July and around September. But there's also another pool who are not going to have any voice at all within that. And it'd be interesting to talk to those firms and think, well, how are you expecting revenue to move in that same time period? And how do you expect the revenue to move, to change the needle, if you're not actually producing marketing at that time? I think that's going to be very tough. So really interesting slide around how long it's going to take us. There's one more slide that's left. And I did want to leave some time for us to be able to answer questions. And this slide was around, okay, we've talked a little bit about opportunities, etc. We've talked a little bit about when you might expect to get your marketing out after COVID-19 as well, when you're expecting the big thought leadership campaigns to drop. What are the subjects that you might like to talk about? Now, within this slide, clearly the right topic for you depends on your objectives, your target audience, your service offering, your messaging, etc. Lots of good stuff that any agency would go through with you at the planning stage, clearly. But we just wanted to get an idea for what some of the topics were that you guys or your peers are thinking about. And in this, those top 3 answers there, 60% resilience, 51% focused on digital transformation, 49% focused on leadership and on how individuals can manage their firms through the crisis. Again, there's some pretty big, meaty topics in that top 3 list. Outside of that, you've got agility, supply chain, sustainability, 3 things that we potentially thought might have been slightly higher within this. And only 27% focused on altruism. And again, looking at that glass half full, half empty, it's a real shame that only 1 in 4 of us are actually thinking about how we can all make a better world. But to be honest, if we ran this survey before COVID-19, I don't think we'd have got 2.7% in that box, let alone 27%. So potentially something good has come of this, and we are talking about altruism. I think these topics show a couple of things. One, they give us a little indication of the kinds of things that people are going to be talking about. And remember, this is your peers. This is not your clients saying that these are the things that we want to hear. That this is your peers saying, here's some of the things that we're probably going to talk about. But it also says, that's not a vast pool of topics. It's actually quite a limited pool of topics. And thinking about that share of voice, again, and how difficult it's going to be because we're all marketing potentially at the same time, I think lots of us are going to be talking about the same things at the same time, and we're going to have to think long and hard about how we're creating these campaigns in order to get the cut through that we want. So I think that's become even harder. And Laura, I know you had some thoughts on that.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think share of voice is going to be an issue that we really need to focus on, you know, now and during the summer months as we prepare for the next season. It's just one thing from my perspective. You know, digital transformation, ESG, they were big topics before the pandemic. They are going to re-emerge and they're going to have more importance than ever, in my opinion. And of course, you know, talking about this, I think regulation is going to be an umbrella for Herbert Smith Freehills to wrap around this. There's going to be lots of changes in terms of data privacy, cybersecurity. You know, as people start to return to work, there's talk of thermal imaging. You know, we've got a tracking app that's being trialled in Isle of Wight. When I say we, I don't mean HSF has the app, just we as the United Kingdom. You know, so what's going to happen to that data? You know, there's a big emphasis on monetizing that, and how businesses are going to be able to use it. And likewise on the ESG front, I think, you know, yes, climate change has been a really important topic, but I think the social and the governance will have a bit more emphasis going forward, and just looking at that in a different way, and in a positive way, and hopefully one where we can rebuild trust with governments, businesses, consumers, and others. So no surprise with the topics, but I think they're all very interesting, and look forward to seeing what comes out from other firms, because you know, we all keep each other honest and inspire each other to look at different creative ways to get that share of voice. So yeah, looking forward to the year ahead.
Good.
Thank you very much to both of you. We've had some questions come through. Thank you to everyone that's put forward questions. We've got the first one from Steve Smith, who asks, what do you think the longer term impact on the use of social media, particularly LinkedIn, by firms to connect with their audience? What will the impact be, do you think? Do you want to have a look at that one first, Laura?
Sure. I think there'll be a lot more dialogue coming through. So particularly with the use of personal accounts, but also, you know, groups and looking at, you know, your company accounts. Hopefully there'll be a bit more commentary coming through rather than it just being a one-way dialogue where, you know, we put up an announcement. I'd like to think that there'll be some more conversations coming through and some more polling as well. And, you know, I think certainly a lot of people across our firm have been a bit apprehensive about using Skype or video calls and, you know, other means of technology. And I think where, you know, they've been forced to adapt, actually social media doesn't look that scary anymore. So they're quite happy to start testing that and using our advice on, you know, how to structure their opinions and use hashtags and, you know, making sure that they're tailoring that in the right way.
I would agree with that, and just think it's a really good question, Steve. And thinking about it, there's a couple of things that I think kind of shine throughout this survey. One of it is the need for planning, and secondly is the need for differentiation. And I look at all of the budget that is moving from travel, from entertainment, from events into this digital umbrella. What that is saying to me is there's going to be all kinds of noise, right? Whether it's on LinkedIn, whether it's webinars, etc. And we all need to think long and hard about how we're going to be different, because the places that we can play are getting narrower. really narrow. And if we're not careful, whether it's LinkedIn, whatever it is, it's going to be a real struggle to get that. So I think it's coming back down to value. And I think if the value exchange is there, whatever the channel is, then I think people will listen. If it isn't, then I think they just won't.
I think, yeah, definitely value becomes so important. It probably leads into our next question from Shauna Andrews, actually, which says, why do you assume that not cutting budgets gives people an advantage? It's about using what you have creatively, plus much of the spend will not be required now, which obviously we touched on within the talk. Certainly working for a barrister's chambers, we're used to working with much smaller budgets and having to be, I think, more creative and use our people more. And so I'd be interested to hear what you thought on that one, Andy.
I think it's a very valid point and well made, to be honest. I use that in a very general sense that, you know, at the end of the day, clearly how we use budget is more important than the budget itself. Absolutely. And we can do lots on unlimited budget. But you could also make a logical point that if we haven't had that budget cut, if we've got more budget to play with, then it's allowing us to create more engaging content, to be more engaging online, etc., etc. So it's probably not one or the other, is it? It's actually having a decent budget and doing the right things with that decent budget that are important. But I fully take that point, yes.
Yeah, I think it probably reteaches us some more discipline with it, which is never perhaps a bad thing. We had just, Andy, a quick one for you on, can you provide some examples of the how-to guides that you saw? I know we're all always keen to get some practical tips whenever we attend these sessions, so I'm sure that will be a lot of interest for people.
The number of things that I looked at, you know, they're only one of a number of different ways to create that kind of publication, but we delved a little deeper into exactly what that was, and two things kind of came out of that. What people are really interested in is not just about reading the firm's perspective about what they should do, which has been given them ad infinitum in all of these microsites, etc., that we've been talking about. What they'd really like is, show me how my peers are responding to this crisis. So what are they doing in order to get themselves out of this hole? And you can do that one of a couple of ways. One, in terms of this kind of survey-driven approach that we've looked at here, the sprint survey that we've done, that I think is a very valid approach. Secondly, and just as importantly, I think not everything needs to be numerical or quant. You know, 5 or 6 key interviews with the right executives at your clients' companies, correctly packaged to help show their peers, your clients, the way I think are great. So I think it's about getting your client's voice into these guides, into these comms, and doing it quickly.
Thanks.
I'm nodding furiously in agreement. I'm constantly pushing our teams to bring in external voice. You know, podcasts are so popular right now, you know, but people don't always want to hear from us. They want to hear from their peers. So I think if we can facilitate those conversations to reveal, you know, how different people across industry are grappling with similar challenges, we've certainly seen that the engagement really peaks when we do that. And, you know, thinking about if you need a more technical update, you know, the right format, probably podcast isn't the right one, because you can't really be that conversational with it. So yeah, so we've definitely tried to put some more processes in place in terms of content channel and customer.
I know we're a little bit tight for time, but there's a couple, I think, of interesting questions that have come up. So one is, has any lack of strategic direction from the board been due to the level of uncertainty in what the new normal will look like as opposed to anything else? And I think that's probably a reasonable assumption. Andy, I don't know what you've got on that one.
And of course it has. Of course it has. And clearly, you know, it's quite easy to look at these surveys and kind of almost point the finger, and that's not what we meant at all. I think in the report that we'll send you at the end of this, we talk about 6 stages of preparation and how to build those plans. Within the plans that are created, that there needs to be scenarios, and we need to be very flexible around those scenarios. And I think what this is driving at, clearly we don't know when we're coming out of lockdown. We don't know when we'll get control of this thing, etc., etc. but I think we need to start planning for different scenarios in exactly the same way that I think the government should have been probably a long time ago. That, you know, if we come out in a month, whatever that looks like, what are we going to do? If we come out in 3 months, whatever that looks like, what are we going to do? If we come out in 5 months, what are we going to do? And what are the things that we need to be saying? So I think the plan needs to be flexible, but we need the plan. And of course, it's been hampered by a lack of direction, of course.
And then I'll take this final question, but there's a vast amount of content obviously being created around COVID-19, and we've got a question here from James Metcalf, who asks, what happens to that content post-lockdown? I mean, what would both of your advice be on that? Do you want to take that on first, Laura?
Yeah, well, we're actually doing a regular content audit, so, you know, reviewing a lot of the articles that have gone up on websites and blogs and other channels to say, you know, is it still relevant? Does it have longevity? Or do we need to tweak it and update it so that we can continue to bring that traffic to that particular area of our infrastructure? You know, and there will be that cull of data where, you know, it's just not relevant anymore. And I think we should all be confident in making that decision, but also being mindful of the search engine optimization, you know, considerations and issues there. I mean, we've particularly tried to dull down the use of COVID-19 or the phrase coronavirus now, because we're seeing that there's a bit of fatigue in the industry. However, that's going to affect our search optimization. You know, so I think there is definitely a balance to be had. But I would like to see that, you know, when we're talking about people issues in terms of the pandemic, that will then transition into the future of work. What does that mean? When we're talking about governance, you know, does that then apply to ESG considerations or, you know, a regulatory reboot? I think there is this thread that runs through the topics that will give it longevity, and you can change that nuance. So I think, you know, all of the effort that we're all putting in right now is definitely not wasted. It's just about recycling and changing that emphasis.
As ever, I would agree with everything that Laura has said there. I would also add that I think right now there's going to be a big light shone on what we're doing right now, and I think clients will hold us to account on how we have helped them throughout this time of crisis. And those firms that genuinely haven't, I think, will clearly find it much harder to get back into the seat.